Good morning, Charlie.
Hey, Pip, good morning. Good morning.
I like your map.
You like the map? Yeah, it's all kind of backwards.
Cool.
Probably backwards looking at it from here. If I point like there to where you were in Guyana, is that backwards or does it look?
No, that's exactly as it is.
Oh, is it? Okay, good. I couldn't quite get my head around that. I was just trying to figure, is
Yeah.
it going to be backwards? Oh, cool.
No, it is perfectly. It looks right from where I am.
Okay, great. How are you doing?
I've been better, Charlie. I'm not very well still. I sort of had a bit of a relapse over the last week, just in
Oh,
bed, hot flushes,
well,
mentally foggy. So if this makes no sense, I do
yeah, that's
apologise. But
embarrassing. Don't worry.
yeah.
No, it's fine.
It's
It's
like
fine.
I didn't go to West Africa. What am I talking about? I went to South America.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Is that obviously, I mean that this is something your illness that you picked up on from the trip to Guyana, I guess. Huh?
Yeah, so it's well, I got glandular fever for sure
Yeah.
from Guyana. But they're also tomorrow. I've actually got to go and see the tropical disease clinic again. I've got this horrible scab on my neck, which has been there now for 4 months, and it's just getting slightly bigger. And they think it might be leishmaniasis, which is not ideal because that's a flesh-eating parasite.
Oh, poor old you. Blimey.
Yeah,
Blimey.
so I'm itchy, achy, and sore. But what can you do? What can you
Yeah.
do, eh,
Oh
Charlie?
gosh. That's a nice backdrop you've got. What's that?
Oh,
The
that's
the
just a piece of art, really, of the world map.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. Is there anywhere you haven't been yet, Pip? Is there, are
many
you,
places, Charlie, many places. I'd love to see more of South America. My gosh, I love it there.
yeah. I mean the last time we spoke, you were just about to head off on that trip. And I think you were going to do some training in Leicestershire for the kayaking and because this was all a first for you, wasn't it? I mean, you never really canoed and kayak properly.
Yeah, absolutely. So, no, we went and did our training at the Leicestershire Outdoor Pursuit Centre, and there's a guy there called Chris Murren who was absolutely fantastic and literally sort of taught me how to paddle because before that, the only time I'd gone paddling was about 15 years previously in New Zealand, and I'd ruled it out as a sport because it was the most horrific thing I've ever done. I was like, I do not understand why people do this.
Yeah.
So I'm quite glad I gave it another stab. But yeah, the guys up in Leicestershire were amazing. And then we joined the British Canoe Symposium, and we did some kayaking there. We went to Wales with a guy called David Bain from NRS. So it was amazing, really, the paddling community.
Yeah.
When they heard what we were up to, everyone just sort of piled in, offered to help plan routes, get us as skills as we could do, offers of kit. So it was a really amazing thing to do in the sense that you realise that the outdoors active industry is a phenomenal place.
Yeah, extraordinary. If it's not too painful to go through all this again, I was wondering whether you could just give a brief outline as to what you were doing going to Guyana.
Mm-hmm.
And you were setting out. Well, let me ask you to tell the story.
Okay, so, well, what were we doing in Guyana? We essentially were trying to be the first people to paddle from source to sea of the Essequibo River, which has never been done, and probably because for 2.5 months we were in dense jungle, essentially. So there's that logistics. And then I guess the other thing is, if you're into running white water, this probably isn't a river you're going to look at because yes, there were rapids and it was waterfalls and things to portage around. But for a beginner kayaker, this was absolutely terrifying. But for anyone who's done a little bit more or has a bit more experience, it's probably a river you'd overlook. So in a sense, it was perfect for us because we had the element of adventure, we had jungle environment, and we were with the world's best teachers in a sense, the indigenous Waiwai who were guiding us along this trip. And it was just phenomenal to learn from them and the skills that they have in the jungle. So yeah, it was one of those trips that I think will be seared into my brain for a lifetime, Charlie.
And remind us who you did the trip with.
So I went along with two of my, I didn't really know them that well at the time, but I'd now say good friends, Ness Knight and Laura Bingham. So I'd known Laura through the adventure industry, and I'd sort of followed Ness on Instagram and always been very impressed by what she'd been up to. And it was actually Laura's idea. She's married to an explorer called Ed Stafford, who was the first man to walk the length of the Amazon. And I think he'd done some filming in Guyana and come home and said to Laura, "Oh my gosh, like this place is Disneyland on speed for animal life." And then he mentioned that no one had paddled down this Essequibo. And I think Laura suddenly went, thanks for that, Ed. That's a brilliant idea. Sort of rang up Ness and I and just said, would you be up for coming along? And we were.
Fabulous. And what sort of time of year did you go in Guyana?
So we set off. Oh, Charlie, is my video frozen?
Yeah, it's just frozen. I was just about to say, I'm going to try and unfreeze you. I'm just trying to think how we do this.
I can turn it on and off, see if that works.
Yeah,
yes,
brilliant.
We're back.
Right.
So we went to Guyana at the beginning of Feb and we came home end of April. So the idea behind that was we were trying to hit it so that it was the rain was at its least, in a sense. So we didn't want gnarly rapids and waterfalls. We wanted it to be a low water.
Yeah.
So in the dry season.
Yeah. And what were your first impressions arriving in Guyana?
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, I was massively ill-informed about the country. I didn't realise for a long time until we, it's an English-speaking country in South America. And up until that point, I didn't realise that there was an English-speaking country in South America. Isn't that bad?
Me neither.
But it was the most amazing place, Charlie. So you get off in Georgetown, which is sort of very hustly and bustly, and then we chartered a plane out up until the YY community, which is the furthest place you can get before you hit the source of the river. And it was like flying into paradise, in a sense. It's just utterly remote, surrounded by jungle, and it was beautiful and such a friendly reception. So to get in, we had to apply for a lot of permissions before. We had to write to the Tushao, who's the head of the village, and say, this is what we're trying to do. Would anyone like to help? They've got a huge history of exploration within the community themselves because they use the river as a way to get to see their relatives who are often in Brazil.
Yeah.
So, I mean, these guys are explorers anyway. So we were talking to the right group of people. And then you had to get permission from the ministry as well. So there are lots of hoops to jump through before you can even land in the indigenous lands, which is absolutely as it should be, really. But they were like, yeah, we love the idea. We'd love to come on board. We'd love to partner up. And that's sort of how it began.
And so once you'd sort of acclimatized, and was the first trip then, once all permissions were granted and so on, what was the first physical challenge that you had to encounter?
So the first physical challenge was to get to the source. And because of the nature of the source being, the river narrows as it goes up into the mountains, and we had inflatable kayaks from NRS, which were amazing, but there were limitations in the sense that we knew we were going to come over like fallen logs. There's so many obstacles on the way to the source of the river. So with the YY, we were in their wooden dugout canoes, which was amazing. So we canoed the first part, and then we took things like chainsaws and machetes and hacksaws just to get through the sheer number of logs and things to get to the source. And then it was a hike up the mountains, really, to try and find the source. So I'd say the first 3 weeks, it took a lot longer than we thought. We'd initially thought it would take about a week, but it was very physical. When we were hiking to the source, we were taking the bare minimum that we have, but we're still carrying all our kit on the back, having cached our kayak or canoes at this point. And yeah, it's just very hot, very physical. Imagine it's hot, it's humid, you're going up mountains, and these aren't pre-cut paths. You're having to machete your way through dense jungle. So I remember saying distinctly at one point, Charlie, remind me never to do a physical journey ever again. It was one of those things I'm thinking, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? But yeah, we got there in the end.
Silly question, but I mean, as you were sort of going along those first 3 weeks to to find the source of the river, were there things obviously when you're packing for a trip like this, you have to be really meticulous, I guess, and go over and over and over again. But was there kind of one moment you say, Christ, I forgot to bring, I don't know, sun lotion or whatever it was? Or was that anything? Or would you have brought something else if you'd actually had the chance again? You know what I mean? Was there a...
Do you know what? I think one thing about this journey is because we knew that once we were under the canopy going up to the source, so before we I'll backtrack a bit and say, before we set off, we went to visit the helicopter rescue people, and they told us that there's a no-fly zone at night, and that they didn't have a winch system in case of trouble, and that if you got into trouble, you'd have to clear the area the size of a football field for a helicopter to land. Now, bearing in mind you're in mountainous, dense, primary jungle rainforest, like this is not an option. So I think from the packing side of things, we really were very conscious of the fact that we were going to be on our own. Like if something went wrong. So the safety side of things was wrapped up. I'd always like more sugar, to be honest, Charlie. Like I should have packed way more sugary sweets.
More chocolate, basically.
Well, yeah, probably like squirms or jelly babies or something that don't necessarily melt. But
of course.
Because it took longer than anticipated, we'd taken snacks and things like that, but we kind of ended up just eating fish and rice because the rations that we had, the nice snacks, slowly ran out as we took longer and longer finding the source.
What about berries and things like that? Were you able to?
Well, that was the amazing thing about being with the YY. You just suddenly see one of the guys, Jackson especially, he would just spot like some Brazil nuts, which he was like, no, in Guyana we call them Guyana nuts. But yeah, he'd find Brazil nuts, and then obviously you've got like acai and the tura berry, which is similar to the acai berry. And it was amazing because they'd show us how to prep it and mash it up, and we'd have acai smoothies essentially for breakfast in the morning. So as and when we did find the fruits of the jungle, like we were in for such a treat. We really were.
And what did the source of the Essequibo River look like?
Unremarkable, Charlie. It's like you think we've hiked all this way and that's it. And my mate Nigel, who is a 16-year-old Guyanese YY guide, he looked at me at one point as we were trudging up this mountain. He's like, what's so special about this source anyway, Pip? And when we got there, I had to look at him and say, you know what, Nigel, I don't really know, but this seems like a good place to start. And it's sometimes when people ask you questions like that, and many times on this journey, actually, Charlie, I had to stop and think, what is it that we're trying to do here? Like, why are we doing this? Specifically, why am I doing this? Like, what is it that I'm trying to prove? Like, what insecurities have I got that have led me to this point? Or is exploration more than that? And so, yes, it's been a very interesting journey into the self as well, this whole trip.
Yeah, imagine.
But the source itself, it was coming out of a sort of a rocky outpost. There's two potential sources up there. And yeah, sort of up high, I saw a butterfly. So, lovely. So yeah, it was an interesting experience.
Okay, so you've got there. It's taken you 3 weeks to get to the unremarkable source, really. But yeah, I mean, so it is remarkable that you got there. And okay, but so you're there. So what's the next stage? What happened then?
Well, it was maybe a bit churlish of me to say the source wasn't unremarkable, because in a sense, what struck me about being up there was the poetry of it, in the sense that from this tiny, tiny trickle of water would come this expansive river ending up in the Atlantic Ocean. And I think the thing that hit me, it wasn't visually exciting. It was the power of little things. Yeah. And that was something that I thought about again and again on the river, is how something so small, be that a source of water or an idea, can grow given the right conditions. So
the first step, yeah.
Yeah, that's what the source represented for me. But as soon as we found it, it was funny because getting there felt like an expedition in itself. And then, we had to go and kayak down over 1,000 kilometers of river. So it was sort of, that's where the expedition really began. But in a sense, we'd already done so much to get to that point.
Absolutely. And is this when you then sort of transfer to the inflatable kayaks, or are you still
Well,
using the wooden
not
ones?
even then. So that the a tributary to the Essequibo is called the Sipu, which is the river that we were walking up in order to get to the source of the Essequibo.
Yeah.
And so we essentially followed the route back down to the first point, well, back to where we'd stored our dugout canoes, which was the last navigable point by water. Then we went back in the dugout canoes, back to the YY village, and then inflated our kayaks and then kayaked the rest of it.
Right.
And that's where we swapped jungle guides. So we had 5 guys leading us to the source, which was amazing. And then we swapped out for Ant and Ramel, who are our river guides, who helped us.
Challenge.
Do you know what, Charlie? Everything is just physical in the jungle. So from the moment we were waking up, we were collecting water to boil. So you've already had to have the previous night chop firewood. So you're looking for dead wood. So you've got your machete and you're chopping down any sort of dead wood. Then you're stringing up your hammock. You're packing up your bags. You're kayaking for the whole day. And then when you finally get into camp, you're having to clear an area so it's suitable for hammock. So making sure that there's no stumps that you're going to land on or any sort of dodgy bushes or things like that. So again, the whole thing from start to finish was so physical. And I think the hardest thing was just keeping up. And initially, I was really physically exhausted. But by the end of the trip, I've never felt more alive. And it makes me realise, like talking to you now, I'm slightly hunched over and, leaning in, looking. But in the jungle, you're constantly stretching, you're moving, and your body, I realise, is designed to do what it's meant to do. And it's actually become something that I've been fascinated about since, is looking at what happens when traditional and modern worlds collide, in a sense. Because, I don't know, we have jaguar wandering through camp regularly at night, and you can hear caiman in the water where you're sleeping, and the stress response that I was getting to that, Charlie, was not dissimilar to when I get a WhatsApp notification or an email alert or some sort of ping on my phone, and I'm thinking this is a really bizarre situation to be in, because in the jungle I'm terrified. I mean, it's like that technological sensation but on speed. But as soon as that threat goes away, my body can relax. But when I came back to the modern world, I found it really hard coming back to London, because constantly I'm like, well, I'm getting those same stress responses, but it's not going away. I can't relax in the same way. So I found that really interesting, and it's something I'm sort of writing about and talking about a lot more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the inner workings, the psychological element, and yes, the as you say, the two worlds colliding. I mean, you're becoming a bit of a past master at this now, aren't you, Pip? I mean, you're with all your trips around the world, and this is something that presumably doesn't get much easier, though, does it?
No, it doesn't. But I don't know, Charlie. In a sense, I do think that we need a broader discussion in society about what we are doing to modern humans. You look at the incidences of mental health. It's 1 in 4 of us suffer from something, and I just think it's because we're putting ourselves in environments that just aren't right for us. And I think it's why I seek out these remote experiences, because it's when I'm kind of free from all of the trappings of the modern world in the sense of the tech. That I feel better. And I think we need to be taking more personal responsibility about how we use tech. Funnily enough, I was on Instagram the other day because I friggin' love Instagram, and I think social media is one of the best things for our society in terms of connection. But it's also, there is like a darker side to it as well, and I think we just need to acknowledge that. And I myself have found myself being slightly addicted to seeing, oh my gosh, how many likes, and things that actually don't matter, yet I'm constantly going back and checking as if I'm an addict. And I'm thinking, well, at the tender age of 33, that I'm an addict. Like, what about young people who haven't actually had that life experience yet, who may actually be limiting themselves, comparing themselves, and in very negative ways, limiting themselves from doing things because they feel like that's what other people do. So yeah, I was keen to talk to Instagram about like what they're planning on doing to stop young people limiting themselves, I guess, and getting too addicted, and using it as a means of opportunity rather than like limitation.
Absolutely. And because there is that expression that, you know, if we alienate ourselves from nature, we're alienating ourselves from our own nature. And interestingly enough, oh, sorry, I was just saying that there is that expression. I'm not sure who said it, but it was years ago. I remember picking up, and they said, if we alienate ourselves from nature, we're alienating ourselves from our own nature. And and interestingly enough, just before doing the interview with you this morning, I was kind of running around, just grabbing a coffee and so on. And it's Radio 4, and the whole conversation this morning by Mariella Fostrup is about, you know, is just about this. It's about the role of social media, especially for teenagers and so on. So tell me more about what you're doing with Instagram. What did
Oh no, it was literally a friend of mine works there, and it's something that I'm keen to write a lot more on, is how we use social media, because I've done a few posts recently which basically said stop following me, because I do think there's an element of personal responsibility. If you're on Instagram and if you're following my adventures and in some way, shape or form it's not making you feel good, then stop following me.
Right.
Because in a sense, it's like the content creators, I want to push out what I want to push out. I talk a lot about mental health and wellness and adventure to do that. Yeah. But the thought that I'm upsetting someone, Charlie, through doing this is horrific. And actually,
right. Have you had that feedback? Have you had any feedback suggesting that that's the case?
Yeah, no, I did. I had a lot of my followers said, no, we love what you do, but it's given us pause for thought. And I think that's it, because I often think that we try and shield ourselves so often in society from negative emotions, but they can be really useful in the sense of, if I'm on Instagram and I feel jealous about someone, I try and interrogate that feeling. Like, what is it that I'm feeling jealous about? Is it because, you know, maybe I'm not doing well enough as I see it in one area, or I want to try and do more traveling of this place, or, you know, whatever it is. I think it's quite a useful feeling because it gives you a barometer of what you actually want to be doing with your own life. And, you know, I think we talked about last time that we spend so much time in society talking about chasing happiness, but it's futile. It's just one emotion in many, and that's the beauty of the human experience, isn't it? Is that we're made up of all these emotions. They're all valid. They all teach us something. And I think this constant focus on happiness inevitably leads to that expectation and reality gap, and that's where the unhappiness, deep unhappiness, really creeps in. Yeah,
well, for my 10 cents, Pip, I think you're using Instagram in a really enlightened way, because you're using it actually as a sort of, your ventures actually acting really as a Trojan horse to raise other issues, you know, and I think that's really valuable. And I know that one of your other followers is this guy doing the walk around the UK at the moment, around concerning mental health. Yeah. And so I think all this is really good, because I think you're broadening your reach, and people are finding you. You know, this is and because the nature of your Instagram entries is varied, and it brings in a lot of different subjects. I think that's why people. Genuinely, I think that you have a wonderful Instagram, you know, account, and it's very refreshing. So in a sense, I think you're answering some of your own questions, and because you are using it in such a positive way.
But it's interesting because I love it, because my followers have such interesting ideas. That's the thing, and if you use it for a discussion forum, and I like the fact you use Trojan horse, because, you know, I love to debate stuff, and actually. You know, if I wrote a long article for a magazine or a newspaper, very few people want to debate. But if you just put out a question on Instagram, you suddenly realise we're so full of questions as humans, and we're all looking for answers. And if you think that everyone can teach you something, we've got thousands and millions of people on that platform who might have some of the best solutions to the world's problems. So let's start engaging with them. I think it's a brilliant platform used well.
I do, and I think you use this in a very authentic way. Back to your